Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let's continue with how those initially aspiring to the way can attain Buddhahood through the Lotus Sutra. And we are beginning a question and answer session. Always valuable and interesting. Let's get right into it, shall we? Question. The Flower Garland School propounds the doctrine of the 5 teachings. For those of you who may not be familiar with the 5 teachings, their comparative classification of Buddhist sutras, the 5 teachings are the Hinayana, the elementary Mahayana, the final Mahayana, the sudden teaching, and the perfect teaching. The perfect teaching indicates the Flower Garland and Lotus Sutras, between which the Flower Garland is assigned a higher place. So, the Flower Garland Sutra, or school, big difference. The school of the Flower Garland, the Avatamsaka Sutra school, does acknowledge the Lotus Sutra, but still maintains that the Flower Garland is superior. I could see why this would occur, simply because the Flower Garland was the first teaching by Shakyamuni when he attained his enlightenment, and he started to teach the experience of enlightenment, and after a couple of weeks he noticed that nobody was understanding what he was talking about, or capable of understanding what he was talking about. And then it dawned on him, I can't teach this, because I'm not teaching people how to get to this. So he stopped teaching in sermons the Avatamsaka, and what he instead started on a program of teaching that would train people's capacity to get to the point where they could experience this enlightenment. So then you get these interpretations of that's perfect enlightenment, and when you get to that, then that's superior to the Lotus Sutra. But it's not superior, and here's why. Because it doesn't teach you how to get to that experience of enlightenment. Only the Lotus Sutra does that. And by Shakyamuni's own words, when he, in the last 8 years of his life, teaches the Lotus Sutra, he prefaces the Lotus Sutra by saying, I've never taught this truth before, this method before. I've never taught how to get to the enlightenment that I achieved before. Only here am I going to reveal that. And that's why so many things are resolved in the Lotus Sutra. Everyone, including people who've done disastrous jobs of their practice, against the practice, they too attain Buddhahood in the Lotus Sutra. Women singled out as able to instantiate their Buddha nature and invoke it. And the tool he gives us is Myoho Renge Kyo, as I was going to say shorthand, but it's not really, it's a compound title that contains within it all of the teachings of his life. And this I've said before, and I'll say it again because I haven't said it in a while. If all you practice and all you study is the Lotus Sutra, you may not get it. And that is because anyone who reads the Lotus Sutra will tell you that there are many concepts in the Lotus Sutra that it just names and goes on. The Lotus Sutra is built on the scholarship of Buddhism, all of it. So you would do well to read the Lotus Sutra, certainly. Myoho Renge Kyo, practice its title. But as you practice Myoho Renge Kyo, when you read something and something jumps out at you, is like, well, so what about Devadatta? What is his story? Where does he come from? Why is he so bad? Why is he so now able to, so on and so forth. Whatever jumps out at you as something incomplete or something as just a label for a bunch of things that you don't know about. That's because the Lotus Sutra is resolving these long-standing discussions. So you may have to go back to the Langavatara Sutra, or the Viramalakirti Sutra, or the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which for me was amazing. The Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is the long one. There are different versions, different excerpts. Kanzi does a great job of translating that one, C-O-N-Z-E or Z-E, Kanzi. I've got a couple of them around here. They're thick. By the time you're done reading that sutra, you'll understand how the mind works. That's a bold statement, but that's how I feel about it. And just reading that, when I went back to the Lotus Sutra and reread it, so many things in the Lotus Sutra that had not even realized before were conceptually buried in the text. That when I reread the Lotus Sutra, there were things, insights, knowledge, experiences of reading that sutra that I'd completely not ignored so much as just walked right on by. Didn't even, well, after I read other sutras, notably for me, the Perfection of Wisdom, when I reread the Lotus Sutra, I went, of course, there it is. That kept happening to me. And my respect, my practice of Myoho Renge Kyo, it just became immense, huge. Because now my earth mind, my human mind, my samsaric mind was a lot of those doors that I thought were walls before. There were doors in them, and I kicked them open, and so much more light came in. That's not in the Flower Garland Sutra. It may be conceptually, but without the exercise of the other teachings, who would understand? Who would get that? You see, there's preparation. Just like anything, you want to be a great track and field athlete, you got to practice. All right. The True Word School, he goes on, puts forth the doctrine of the 10 stages of the mind, declaring that all the other sutras, being exoteric teachings, are inferior, while the True Word School, because it represents the esoteric teachings, is superior. The Zen school rejects all the sutras as belonging to the realm of written teachings and asserts, quote, a separate transmission outside the sutras, independent of words or writings. Because enlightenment, they say, is gained merely by sitting and facing the wall, the Zen school alone is superior. Do you see why Zen, by its own definition, isn't Buddhism? Because they throw away all of the sutras, right? Maybe 1 in 10 zillion million people who practice Zen will actually awaken their Buddha nature. But they wouldn't even call it Buddha nature, right? Because that is Buddhism. So what do they call it? The void? They don't understand the real definition of emptiness if you read Buddhism. So anyway, lots of controversy with Chan or Zen. The Pure Land School sets forth 2 kinds of practices, correct and sundry. The Lotus Sutra and the various other sutras are rejected as belonging to the category of sundry practices, and hence one is urged to discard, close, ignore, and abandon them. The 3 Pure Land Sutras, on the other hand, they claim, are adapted to the people's capacity, and are wonderful sutras belonging to the realm of correct practices. Thus, each school, in its conceit, maintains its own biased attachment. But which one represents the true intention of Shakyamuni Buddha? They don't seem to care. They've gone their own way and said, whatever Shakyamuni says, it's just entertainment. We know best. You're practicing Buddhism. That is Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching. How do you reject the founder and teacher? I've never understood that. Anyway, this is in the form of a question. So this is Nichiren saying, what about this? Right? To himself. And so here comes his answer. Each school declares its own sutra to be superior, all other sutras being dismissed as inferior, and on this basis labels itself the correct school. That's obviously the situation, right? But their arguments are based merely upon the words of the teachers and not upon the Buddha's teachings. Politics, popularity contests. Only the Lotus Sutra was proclaimed superior by the Buddha himself. When he expounded the simile of the 5 flavors, likened them to the teachings of the 5 periods. He also declared that all of the various sutras that he has preached, quote, now preaches and will preach, end quote, in terms of the path of attaining Buddhahood, none could rival the Lotus Sutra. These statements are, in truth, the Buddha's own golden words. I mean, therefore, when people declare that their own sutra surpasses the Lotus Sutra, or that their own school is superior to the Lotus school, they are like persons of inferior rank calling someone of high rank a commoner, or retainers whose families have for generations been in the service of a certain lord, turning against him and declaring him to be their servant. How can they escape grave retribution? I'm sure that grave retribution is a Western translation there. Basically, what they can't escape is the grave or the negative causes they've created against their own enlightenment. That would be a more accurate statement than retribution. That's very Western. On the other hand, the assertion that the various other sutras rank below the Lotus Sutra is not based upon the words of the teachers, but is plainly stated in the text of the sutra itself. In this respect, it is like a ruler asserting that he is superior to his subjects, or a samurai calling a commoner a person of low rank. What penalty could this possibly bring? This sutra, the Lotus, represents the true intention of the Buddha and the prime concern of Tendai and Miao Lo. In other words, we've known this scholarship since, 5th, 6th century China. So we've known this for hundreds of years. Calling out the current teachers of Japan and saying, where do you get off? The scholarship is there. How do you turn against this scholarship? It must only be for your own personal gain. Next question. The teachings of the Buddha's lifetime were all intended to benefit the people. True. And because people differ from one another in their innate nature, he expounded the various teachings. Certainly that was a motivation, but the way that's stated is a little misleading. Nevertheless, his basic intention in all cases was simply to enable everyone to attain the Buddha way. That's true. Therefore, people reason that the sutra that is pertinent to oneself may be quite irrelevant to the others, while the sutra that is pertinent to them will be irrelevant to oneself. I need to read that again. That was confusing. While the sutra that is pertinent to them will be irrelevant to oneself. The sutra that is pertinent to oneself may be quite irrelevant to others. Makes sense. While the sutra that is pertinent to them, I see, will be irrelevant to oneself. All right, so now we're personalizing different sutras for people's capacity, which means that people are now taking it upon themselves to decide what they're capable of and not listening anymore to Shakyamuni, who's stepping through all of these things to get to the culminating teachings. Oh, no, he can't be right. This is the one for me. What are you doing? So this question goes on. Thus, for example, for persons who can attain the way through the Nembutsu teachings of the sutras other than the Lotus Sutra, the meditation and related sutras will be of greatest benefit, while the Lotus Sutra will be of no help. Who decided that? Conversely, for those who can reach Buddhahood and achieve the way through the Lotus Sutra, the other sutras will be irrelevant, while the Lotus Sutra will be of greatest benefit. When the Buddha said, quote, "In these more than 40 years I have not yet revealed the truth," he didn't say this truth, this particular one for the people who get it. He talked about his entire teaching. But let's see how this is misquoted. When he said, though they, the Buddhas, point out various different paths, because we all have different paths, right? In truth, they do so for the sake of the Buddha vehicle. Or when he said, honestly discarding expedient means, I will preach only the unsurpassed way. He was addressing persons with the capacity to attain the way through the Lotus Sutra. Right, everybody. Everyone in the world agrees that this argument is reasonable. Okay, so what's your problem? How should we understand this? If this view is correct, then there is really no difference between the Mahayana and the Hinayana, and no dissimilarity between the provisional and true teachings. Thus I find myself in great doubt as to which sutra the Buddha defined as representing his true intention, and which in fact he proclaimed to be the teaching for attaining Buddhahood. Wow, this is a very confused statement, but maybe you see something resonating with you in here. So let's hear Nichiren's answer. From the very beginning, the Buddha's intention in appearing in this world was to preach the wonderful law. But because the people differed so greatly in their capacity and were not ripe to receive it, the Buddha first pondered for a period of 3 weeks, then spent the following 40 years and more preparing and readying the people, and then finally preached this wonderful law. The Buddha said, quote, if I merely praised the Buddha vehicle, then the living beings, sunk in their suffering, would be incapable of believing in this law. And because they rejected the law and failed to believe in it, they would fall into the 3 evil paths. He also said, the world-honored one has long expounded his doctrines and now must reveal the truth. So this is an incredibly important passage in your study, in your entire study of Buddhism, and certainly the Lotus Sutra. Is Shakyamuni clearly explains his periods of teaching, and why he had to do that. And he explains why he dropped the Avatamsaka sermon, the flower garland, in favor of now nurturing people's capacity to the point where they could get to that wonderful experience, and gave them a tool to instantiate it. He didn't do that anywhere else. He just gave them tools to work on. Not until the Lotus Sutra, the Myoho Rengekyo, did he say, okay, now you can experience that wonderful enlightenment that I spoke about in the flower garland, but I didn't give you the knowledge, the depth of understanding, and a tool, a method that assuredly would make it so you would all experience it. So when you go back and read the Avatamsaka Sutra, it's totally different. Because now you understand, with all the flowery words, what he was just off the roller coaster and said, wow, check this out. This is amazing. It's like this and it's like that. And you go this and you get, and everyone was like, what's a roller coaster? Right? They didn't know. And in his excitement, Shakyamuni forgot. Oh yeah, they haven't gone through these 6 or 7 years of hard self analysis, meditation, and practice. Right? Shakyamuni Siddhartha almost starved to death just by putting himself through privations, so that he himself could understand the mind, could understand what the nature of suffering was. Where does it come from? How does it manifest? What is it to challenge my body and mind? What connection can I make that will be universal? Right? He put himself through hell, many hells. And when he finally relaxed into it and said, I'm not moving from this spot until I get it. What his mind and body went through for that period of time was a metamorphosis of understanding, with those years preceding it, feeding his endurance, feeding his willpower, feeding his determination. Because when you start something, your determination may be great until you hit some obstacles. And then those obstacles knock you down. Do you get back up? If you get back up, your determination has a different depth of understanding, doesn't it? And then you hit another obstacle. Ugh! Do I really want to do this? And then you get up and you say, hell yeah, I want to do this. Now your determination and your resolve is really cemented in you. By trial, by fire, right? You are hardened steel, and you go at it some more. And quite possibly, invariably, you will hit another obstacle. And maybe it makes you fighting mad. Or maybe it deflates you totally, and you quit. Until one day you finally find the courage, the strength, the willpower, and you go, I gotta get back on the horse. I gotta do this. Right? So we talk about determination, willpower. We talk about resolve, right? To fuse with our Buddha. Not only to invoke our Buddha mind, but to inculcate it, to breathe and be it. It's much harder, and it takes a great deal of determination. Right? So this is why he quotes the Buddha and says, if I merely praise the Buddha vehicle, then living beings sunk into their suffering, because that's samsara, would be incapable of believing in this law. It just would be, there'd be too many obstacles. And because they rejected the law and failed to believe in it, they would fall into the 3 evil paths in the lower worlds, hell, hunger, animality. He also said, the world-honored one has long expounded his doctrines and now must reveal the truth. So, we're seeing that evidence today in the latter day playing out. People who know nothing of the Lotus Sutra, or who hear that the Lotus Sutra has the culminating teachings of Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, the immediate invocation of Buddha nature, they hear that and they have no concept of what that actually means. So they call it magic words, or they call it, some narrow blah, 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 whatever. They just discount it because it's just too big for them to conceive of. This is why it's important that they be nurtured, that they be told about it with relatable depth. This is why I'm doing this channel. Otherwise, left to their own devices, look at the world today. It is the embodiment of greed, manipulation. That's what anger in Buddhism is about: backstabbing, manipulation, so on and so forth. Avarice and foolishness beyond understanding. How can we live in a world where the truth no longer has meaning? In fact, the truth is something to be overturned and ridiculed. Because now we have fake truth, alternative facts, words that make no sense whatsoever are spouted out with a smile as a challenge to anyone who has the ability to think. Ha! You think, fool! That's the world we live in. What the hell is going on? In this soup of stupidity is where we need to champion Myoho Renge Kyo. It's not easy. That's why Nichiren speaks of forbearance, a teaching that knocks me in the dirt every time I think about it or read about it. Forbearance. Forbearance in a different age may have been something fairly easy to conceive. And I'm sure you, as a friend or a brother or sister or a parent, have often exercised forbearance. But would you call it easy? The more you find out about the world at large and the negativity at work, the foolishness at work, the avarice at work, forbearance becomes a very steep and high mountain indeed. But that's the kind of determination we need today. Nichiren goes on. The meanings of these passages is that the Buddha from the very beginning intended to preach this doctrine of the Buddha vehicle. But he knew that the people, having no inclination to hear the Buddha's law, would not put their resolute mind and conviction in it, but on the contrary, would undoubtedly slander it. Isn't that what I just described? Therefore, in order to develop the people's capacity to the same level, he first spent a period of 40 or more years preaching the flower garland, the Gamma, correct and equal, and wisdom sutras, and then at the very last preached the Lotus Sutra. At that time, Shariputra, Malgalyayana, and the others of the 12,000 voice hearers, Manjushri, Maitreya, and the others of the 80,000 bodhisattvas, the 10,000 of millions of wheel-turning kings, as well as Brahma, Shakra, and the countless other heavenly beings who had all been present during the Buddha's more than 40 years of preaching. It didn't suddenly appear in the Lotus Sutra, although we read about them there. Each exclaimed with regard to the teachings they had heard before, quote, "We would never gain the immeasurable insight of the thus come one," end quote. But when they heard him preach the Lotus Sutra, they rejoiced, exclaiming, quote, "This cluster of unsurpassed jewels has come to us unsought. We didn't even know this is what we were looking for." Therefore, they said, quote, "Since times past, often we have heard the world-honored ones preaching, but we have never heard this kind of profound, wonderful, and superior law." They also said the Buddha preaches a rarely encountered law, one never heard from times past. The intent of these passages is to praise the Lotus Sutra by saying that though those present at the assembly had heard the Buddha preach a considerable number of times during the preceding 40 years and more, they had never heard anything like the law of the Lotus Sutra, the Myoho Renge Kyo, and that the Buddha had never before preached a doctrine such as this. The doctrines heard, and this is directly from the sutras, Nichiren's not pulling this out of the sky. The doctrines heard by the assembly in the preceding 42 years cannot in any way be compared with those of this sutra they were now hearing. And that reference is because you will read many sutras that have that opening chapter or chapters talking about all of those in attendance. It's a very familiar device of the sermons. Because whenever Shakyamuni preached, he would make sure that the people that were present, the actual humans that were present to hear his sermon, understood that all of these other mental conjectures and exercises were also included in this sermon. This sermon wasn't preached just for you and you and you and you. It's preached for all potential human mental understanding, all of samsara, all of mental conjuring. So from the very get-go, Shakyamuni was very clear that this teaching was for every single mental capacity. And you guys. And when he got to the Lotus Sutra, now this, for all of you, again, a huge assembly, this is the one vehicle. This is the way you will instantiate your Buddhahood. Only in the Lotus does he do that. Therefore, it is a grave error to assert that this sutra was preached for the sake of persons who can attain the way through the Lotus Sutra, but that it is useless for persons who gain the way through the sutras preached earlier. That's a grave error. In the case of the sutras preached during the previous 42 years, since they were provided as expedient means for individuals each with a particular capacity or relationship, one can perhaps speak of them as being relevant to some persons but not to others. Yeah, that's not invalid. But in the case of the Lotus Sutra, the different capacities that had enabled individuals to benefit from hearing one or another of the earlier sutras were all drawn together and readied so that they became identical and pure. The sutra was preached to such people. You remember what I said earlier about my own experience? I read many other sutras. I still do. But I singled out the perfection of wisdom for myself. I didn't say to you, if you want to know more and really launch your Buddhism, just read that sutra. I never said that. I encourage you to read it as I encourage you to read many others. I simply said that for me, I found great springboards of understanding in that particular sutras. But I'm not discounting the springboards that I felt in the Lagavatara or the Virmakayati or the Suddhadharma or just many other sutras that I've read. Some earlier sutras that I've read, they just make me smile because as I read them, I go, oh, yeah, I already know this. It's interesting how much time was spent in teaching this and how the depth of understanding that I have about that breathing exercise and how to meditate is so far beyond what this is explaining in this sutra. I'm not belittling Shakyamuni's words. No. What I'm pointing out is that Shakyamuni's earlier teachings, it's like if you know algebra and you pick up a fourth grader's book on adding and subtracting fractions. It's somewhat entertaining, but it seems like pablum compared to what you know. Not because it's an unnecessary teaching. It was very necessary for people of that capacity. For fourth graders, that was super hard. When you were a fourth grader, it was super hard. But your understanding is so much more profound now that when you read adding and subtracting fractions, it has a whole other appearance to you. It's the same with the sutras. They were taught to specific groups of people for specific levels of understanding. Yeah, as Nichiren says, yeah, you could say that. But it's not because they're superior. You can't launch a rocket to the moon simply by knowing fractions. You have to have much greater understanding of what numbers are, what they represent, what the functions of moving them around is. Come on, you know what I'm talking about. The sutra was preached to such people, therefore, there can be no question of it being relevant to some persons and irrelevant to others. Sakyamuni's goal from the get-go was a universal teaching that anyone could practice, no matter their level of understanding. That's pretty powerful, but he said it on top of a great deal of scholarship. Now that you know this, this is what I heard. Right? How lamentable that the distinctions between Mahayana and Hinayana, or between provisional and true teachings, should become confused in this matter, so that the purpose of the Buddha's advent has been lost, and the people go around declaring that the Lotus Sutra is useless for persons with the capacity to attain the way through the earlier sutras, which is an incorrect statement. There may be a few, and Shakyamuni said, there may be one in, and you know how numbers are in Buddhism, that might through this path attain enlightenment, but they are very few and very unique, and people whose capacity is already there. Don't credit the teaching, credit the capacity of the individual, because they already know this. But this is a universal teaching to guarantee that you and you and you and you and her and them, anyone can invoke and experience their Buddha-ness, because it's already there. They just don't know it. They don't know how to recognize it. They don't know how to get there. And the teaching Shakyamuni wants to put out is that if you just do this, you will invoke it. And the more you invoke it, the more you'll get to know it. And the more you get to know it, the more you can realize it and put it into your human experience. It's always about living this life to its fullest, free, liberated from the sufferings. What sufferings? The sufferings we ourselves, in our human state, create, constantly create. One should guard against and fear such errors. Don't let them influence you. In past times, there was a man known as the great teacher Tukuitsu, who taught just this sort of doctrine to others and fully believed in it with his own mind, reading the Lotus Sutra in the light of such an interpretation. But the great teacher Dengyo attacked him, saying that though he praises the Lotus Sutra, he destroys its heart. After that, the great teacher Tokuitsu's tongue split into 8 pieces, and he died. Expedient means, right? Do we have time for one more question? I think I'm going to save this for another part. I'm trying to make these, especially when we're dealing with this heavy doctrinal discussion, I'm trying to make these a little bit shorter because there's a lot to digest here. So we'll save the next question for the next video. In the meantime, please remember, especially with videos on subjects like this, that it may be very helpful to rewatch, re-listen, just have it in the background as you do something, or meditate, sit in a nice comfortable chair where you won't have distractions, and just listen to what I'm talking about. Maybe have a copy of the Lotus Sutra next to you so you can dive through it, find references, so on. Find your way of study. We all have our own specific, what's the word I'm looking for? Our modes, our regimens, our process for study. Whatever yours is, if it helps to download the Buddhahood podcast and listen to these videos, use it. That's why I put all this stuff on the internet. It isn't to gratify myself. It's to share insights I've had and questions that I have so that all of us can be in a greater discussion about how to practice correctly our own path to invoking Myoho Renge Kyo. And with that, I thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your support in this way, and the other modes of support, of course, that you know that are in the cards on this video. With that, I'll let you go today, and I can't wait till we move on in this Go Show. It's packed with information, a lot of it familiar, some of it worded differently, maybe gain different insight from this one. Let me know what you think. Any specific insight that you've had, don't be afraid to put it in the comments. There'll be many other people who think as you do, or will find insight in what you say. So let's all participate and strengthen our practice together. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. See you next time.